Okay, welcome to video 6 of Unit 10. Where does the United States go after the fighting in World War II, after the dropping of the atomic bombs on Japan? What do we then look like? Let's start with the presidency. We kind of have to backtrack here a little bit because I told you that FDR dies, but we really didn't get into that. It was like a blip on the radar. So let's trace this through. War is going to break out in 1939 in Europe. The United States participation is going to gradually increase over time to help the Allies. 1940, we said that's the third cycle that FDR gets elected. He wins by nearly 5 million votes. People overwhelmingly are going to say, let's keep FDR in power. The war is growing. We need to keep the same leader. Now is not the time to elect someone new. FDR is going to continue the practice that he used during the Great Depression of the fireside chats to keep the people involved in the war effort. He's going to use those radio shows, the fireside chat, to report on the events and push people to support the war. In 1944, when another election cycle comes up, FDR is going to run and win the fourth term, the fourth time in a row. The 22nd Amendment isn't going to be passed until 1951. The 22nd Amendment, just think two twos, creates the two-term limit. So it won't be until after FDR that we create this rule that presidents can't do that again. It had just been tradition before this, a part of that unwritten constitution, but now we have to make it an actual rule. We have to make it actually permanent. In February of 1944, FDR is going to gain the commitment of Stalin to enter the war against Japan at the Yalta Conference. This is going to be a meeting of the big three, Churchill, Stalin, Roosevelt. But Roosevelt and the United States, the greater United States, do not want Stalin to actually help us in Japan, which is why we are going to see the use of the atomic bomb in Japan. FDR won't make that decision though, because in April of 1945, FDR is going to suffer a cerebral hemorrhage, which leads to his death. Now, some people are going to speculate that towards the end of FDR's life, he had really been declining in his health, and that decline in his health would lead him to make some decisions that were not best for the nation, like at Yalta, when Stalin agrees to commit to enter against Japan. That agreement from Stalin, some people will say, makes the United States look like we can't handle this ourselves. And when Truman takes the presidency, he has to figure out, what do I do now? Where is my place in all of this? The shoes that he has to fill are very large. FDR's 4-time wins to the presidency is going to be the only time that takes place in history. FDR's presidency is one of the most progressive, most active presidencies, not just because he was elected 4 times, but just the sheer amount of events that he deals with. He's going to gain power in the presidency for presidents to come after him through the passing of his New Deal programs. He sets out this role for the federal government to not only regulate the economy and make sure a Great Depression doesn't happen again, but to be hands-on in social issues, help the people help themselves. The war is also going to expand the powers of the president because FDR had to lead the nation through this. We couldn't have another World War I. We couldn't have another time where the United States comes into a war, helps win it, and then disappears into the good night. So FDR takes this role to act differently than we had in World War I, both in the beginning, in the middle, and then hopefully in the end. Roosevelt expanded the powers of the presidency in order to be successful in the United States throughout the war. Truman is going to have to expand the powers of the presidency. I don't think it says anywhere, and by I don't think, I know, it doesn't say anywhere in the Constitution that the president has the power to drop an atomic bomb. But Truman has to make that decision, and he has to make that decision very early on in his presidency to keep the nation safe, just like FDR had to make decisions during his presidency to keep the nation safe. These decisions just happened to expand the power of the presidency. So, who the heck is this Truman guy? Well, that was what the United States citizens were asking themselves upon Roosevelt's death. Truman had only met with FDR a few times. They had not been president and vice president together for very long. And FDR, he had been running this show for 3 terms. All right, that's 12 years. He didn't really need a strong vice president, or so he thought. Truman had zero knowledge of the intricate plans of the atomic bomb. So, in the first few months of Truman's presidency, he had to decide on dropping the atomic bomb, actually putting in place the United Nations, which was a plan of FDR's, and he had to handle the Potsdam Conference, which was going to decide the fate of Germany with Stalin and Churchill. All eyes were on him. Everybody wanted to see, what is this guy, who we don't even know, going to do in relation to this war. Truman is going to have to attempt to work at the speed of FDR, knowing very little about the situation that he was in. Like I said, pretty big shoes to fill. The post-war goals that were set out here, we're going to have to figure out what those are and how do we execute them at the Potsdam Conference. This is going to be a meeting of the big 3. When I say big 3, I am talking the United States, I am talking the replacement of Churchill in Great Britain, which is going to be Attlee, and then I am talking Stalin, okay? We are talking these 3 leaders coming together to have to determine the fate of Germany. Germany is going to be decided at Potsdam to be divided into 4 zones of occupation. Those zones of occupation are going to be split between the United States, Great Britain, France, and the Soviet Union. Okay? Poland is going to get new borders as decided by the big 3. And Stalin agrees at Potsdam that Poland would have free elections. Okay, they agree that is going to happen, because even this idea of democracy versus communism begins at Potsdam. And Great Britain and the United States are going to want free elections for Poland. Stalin is going to get war reparations from Germany, but only if he promised to enter the war against Japan, which he does. We don't need them, but he agrees that he would. Also at Potsdam, it is decided that war criminals would be brought to trial. So war criminals from Germany, Japan, Italy are going to be tried for what they did during the war. Germany's economy is also going to be restructured in the hopes to avoid post-World War I feelings and situations. So Potsdam is really putting together a setup for how we're going to get out of this war and back to peacetime. What we really see post-World War II is the emergence of superpowers. Since the 1500s, places, empires, I should say, like France, Spain, Great Britain, they had the most influence over global developments. But after Germany and Japan's aggressive taking of land, colonial nations not going to be putting up with not having their independence. They're going to use the treatment of Germany and Japan on their lands to say we should get independence now. There should be no more this overlord leader so far away controlling people who they don't even know. That shouldn't be a thing anymore. Imperialism, stronger countries taking over weaker countries, is going to be on the decline. Freedom to decide what kind of government you want is going to be what countries want post World War II. The United States and the Soviets are going to gain the title of superpower because of their role in ending World War II. Both the United States and the Soviet Union are going to absolutely dominate in the decisions that are made in the post war world. And those decisions are just so happen to be in opposite views of each other. Post World War II, we are going to see the establishment of the United Nations. The League of Nations following World War I was way too weak. And after World War II, we are going to want to avoid the mistakes of World War I again. I mean, we're really just trying to learn from the past, okay? We let the past repeat itself from World War I to World War II. Now we don't want a World War III. The United Nations is going to be a vision of Stalin, Roosevelt, and Chamberlain. But when the delegates meet to actually write up what the United Nations will look like, FDR will have already passed. The United Nations is going to be created in the spirit of globalism, the idea that everybody around the globe should participate in making sure that the economies of the world are safe and that foreign policy works in the best interest of everybody. That way, we avoid a World War III. Nations are going to recognize that you cannot be completely isolated. We learn that because people like the United States, you tried isolationism and it didn't work. So we know after World War II that cannot work again. The United Nations is going to be formally created in 1945 and its headquarters was placed in New York City. So how the heck does this United Nations work? The United Nations Charter is going to call for a Security Council to serve as kind of the executive branch. They get to make all the decisions. They're the ones that are pretty much in power. They get to do things like authorizing sanctions, which are economic punishments, and they have the authority to use force and deploy what they call peacekeeping troops when people don't follow the rules. On that Security Council, though, we are going to see a breakdown of a power structure here, okay? The great powers are going to be the most powerful ones. The great powers are going to be held in the hands of the United States, Great Britain, France, China, and the Soviet Union. Those 5 nations are going to hold permanent voting seats on the Security Council. And they get a power of veto in case some decisions get brought about that somebody doesn't agree on. What happens, though, is a decision is made when creating the United Nations that actions cannot be taken without all 5 in agreement. When the Cold War comes around, the United Nations is going to be stagnant because the Soviet Union and China are going to have very different ideologies than the United States, Great Britain, and France, meaning that we cannot get them all on the same page. Now, those 5 seats are just half of the General Assembly seats. Just half of the deciding powers on the Security Council. So there are 10 seats in total. 5 of them are held by those nations listed there. The other 5 are going to get elected by the General Assembly every 2 years. The General Assembly is basically a town meeting of the world. Okay, you have representatives from countries all around the world. Everybody gets a seat, but not everybody gets the voting power like those great powers do. You can get voted in every 2 years, but that is by the whole General Assembly. Within the United Nations, committees are going to be formed to address ongoing issues. So it kind of works like the House of Representatives. You got a lot of people there, you break them into small groups, and they all get specialized topics that they handle, like humanitarian and legal concerns. They are going to pass resolutions and make recommendations to the Security Council. So they really study the focused issues to make recommendations to the people who are making the big decisions. And the United Nations works like a well oiled machine. It has the might and it has the organizations that the League of Nations did not have. What we have to look at next, though, is what was happening post war on the U.S. home front, because the United Nations and these meetings are really what was happening globally. But we have to look at smaller scale what was happening to our people here because of the war.